Willow Lane was the kind of street that barely made a whisper. Tucked at the edge of the sleepy town of North Haven, it ran only 6 houses long, all built in the 1940s, each with broad porches and creaky wooden fences. There were no streetlights, only the gentle glow from the windows and the soft rustling of willow trees dancing in the evening breeze. And at the very end of the lane stood number 16, a quiet gray house with ivy-covered walls and shuttered windows. No lights ever turned on at night. No laughter drifted out. No cars pulled in or out. To everyone around, it had become the silent house. For almost 20 years, it sat that way. Silent. Still. Unchanging. People in North Haven barely remembered the last person who lived there. Some said it was a school teacher. Others whispered about a reclusive artist. But over time, the stories faded, and the house simply became background noise in the rhythm of the town. That is, until the summer of 2022. It started with a letter. Officer Daniel Reeves, recently transferred from the city to the small-town police department, was sorting mail when he came across an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with neat handwriting. There's something buried under the kitchen floor of the house on Willow Lane. Please look before it's too late. There was no name, no explanation. Just that. Daniel took the note seriously, not because it seemed urgent, but because something about it felt tired, like the person who wrote it had been waiting a long time to be heard. The department contacted the town clerk. Records showed that house number 16 had been in the name of Judith Everly, a retired high school English teacher who had owned the home since 1985. But there was no phone number, no activity on her bank account, and no property taxes paid in nearly 5 years. When officers went to check the house, the door was locked, but not bolted. A dusty "For Sale" sign leaned against the porch rail. Inside, the air was still and cold. The rooms were full of old furniture, covered in white sheets. A teacup sat half full on a side table, stained with time. Dust blanketed everything, and cobwebs hung like curtains. But the most curious thing was the kitchen. The floor had been carefully covered with vinyl tiles, newer than the rest of the house, a strange detail in a home that hadn't been touched in years. The police got a warrant and brought in a ground-penetrating radar team. What they found was exactly what the letter described. Beneath the kitchen floor, encased in concrete, were the remains of a human body. The discovery stunned the town. The newspapers called it the Willow Lane Mystery. The body was exhumed and sent for forensic testing. Though time had taken its toll, dental records identified the remains as Martin Everly, Judith's husband, reported missing in 2001. Judith, by then, would have been in her late 70s, but when investigators searched for her, they hit a dead end. She hadn't been seen in over a decade. Neighbors were interviewed. Most hadn't seen her in years, and assumed she had moved to a retirement home. One woman, Mrs. Gail Pembroke, remembered seeing her just once in 2008, walking slowly down the street with a cane, wearing a blue scarf. After that, nothing. So who wrote the letter? And why now? The deeper the investigators dug, the stranger the story became. Martin Everly had been a quiet man, a retired surveyor, soft-spoken, polite. Friends said he was devoted to Judith, but often seemed anxious in social settings. Judith, in contrast, had been lively and outspoken, loved by her students and known for her sharp wit, but those close to them recalled subtle signs that things weren't as perfect as they appeared. Their former neighbor, Tom Ellsworth, shared an unsettling memory. One summer night in the late 90s, he had heard loud arguing from the Everleys' home. Martin's voice was muffled, but Judith's had rung out clear and angry. "You promised me," she had yelled. "You said she was gone for good." Tom never knew what it meant and didn't ask. There was also an incident from 1994. Judith had filed a missing persons report for a girl named Claire Jennings, a student who had once lived with the Everleys under a temporary guardianship. Claire, 16 at the time, had been part of a mentorship program. She'd come from a troubled home, and Judith had volunteered to take her in. Claire vanished one night in July. No note, no sign of struggle. The case was closed due to lack of evidence, and most believed she had run away. Now, with Martin's body found in the kitchen floor and Judith missing, detectives reopened Claire's file. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Reeves continued reviewing boxes of evidence pulled from the Everly house. In a dusty attic trunk, he found dozens of letters bundled with twine. They were from Claire to a friend named Tamara, never mailed. In them, Claire described her life with the Everleys. "Judith is nice when people are around, but when it's just us, she's different. Martin watches me all the time. He knocked on my door last night, just stood there. I think something bad happened here before me. I feel it. In the walls, in the floor." One letter, dated 2 days before her disappearance, read, "If anything happens to me, tell someone. I think they know I've been sneaking into the basement. I found something, an old box. I'm going to open it tonight." That box was never found. In the weeks that followed, the forensic team uncovered another shocking detail. Judith Everly had not simply vanished. Records from a care facility 3 towns over showed a Jane Doe had been admitted in 2012, suffering from advanced Alzheimer's. She had been picked up, wandering a roadside, confused and unable to speak, with no ID and no known relatives. She had been placed in long-term care under the name Mary L., assigned randomly. A nurse recognized her face from a news article about the Willow Lane discovery. Judith had been there all along, silent, forgotten, lost in her mind. When police arrived to speak with her, they found a frail woman with white hair and distant eyes. She could not recall her name, her home, or the face of her husband. But when shown a photo of Claire Jennings, her hands trembled. She whispered, she knew. As gently as possible, authorities began piecing together the truth. Claire had discovered something in the house, likely the remains of someone else before her. Perhaps someone who had lived there long ago. Perhaps connected to a darker part of Judith and Martin's past. There were signs that Judith, in her youth, had once been part of a radical spiritual commune, known for its strict rules and odd beliefs. Though the group had disbanded in the late 70s, whispers remained of secret rituals and punishment for betrayal. A few of its members had vanished under mysterious circumstances, including a young woman named Emily Sloan, whose photo bore a striking resemblance to Judith. Authorities now suspect that Emily Sloan was Judith, living under a new identity, and Martin, perhaps he was a follower, or a protector, or simply a man caught in a web he didn't know how to escape. The house had secrets long before Claire arrived. Claire just got too close. With the help of dental records and a deep scan of the basement walls, another body was eventually recovered beneath the foundation, believed to be Claire Jennings. She had never run away. She had been silenced. The entire town mourned. Memorials were held. Her story was finally told. Judith, now too far gone to answer questions, remained in care. No charges could be filed. Martin's death, determined to be from blunt force trauma, was ruled a homicide. But with no living suspect able to stand trial, the case was closed. In the end, the letter remained the greatest mystery. Who sent it? It wasn't Judith. She had been unwell for years. Some believe it was a former neighbor. Others think it may have been Tamara, Claire's old friend, now grown, perhaps seeking justice after all this time. No fingerprint, no return address, just a single, desperate message. There's something buried under the kitchen floor of the house on Willow Lane. Today, number 16 remains empty. The windows are boarded now. A small plaque was placed on the front lawn, not by the city, but by someone anonymous. It reads, "For Claire, for the voices unheard." The house is silent, but the truth speaks. And when the wind passes through the trees on Willow Lane, it carries with it a hush, a lullaby, secrets finally told, silence broken by courage. Even if it took decades, sleep comes gently now to North Haven. Even the silent house seems to rest. The town of North Haven didn't return to normal right away. Some places recover quickly from dark revelations, but Willow Lane had changed forever. The house at number 16 no longer blended into the background. It had become a place of legend, of mourning, of whispered questions never quite answered. Weeks passed since the discovery beneath the kitchen floor. The Everly case made headlines across the state, then slowly disappeared from the news cycle. But for Officer Daniel Reeves, the story didn't end when the cameras left. Something still tugged at him. The timeline, the letters, the second body in the basement. There were pieces missing, so he kept digging. Daniel requested temporary access to house number 16. The property, now in legal limbo, had been scheduled for demolition. He knew that once the wrecking ball came, any secrets still buried within its walls would be lost forever. He spent hours each day walking through the house, listening to its silence. He focused on the attic. It had already yielded Claire's letters, but Daniel believed there was more. One evening after sunset, he returned with a flashlight and a small crowbar. He carefully removed one of the old floorboards. Beneath it, wrapped in faded linen and sealed in wax, was a journal. The journal belonged to Judith, or rather, to Emily Sloan, as she was known before becoming Judith Everly. The first entries dated back to 1973. They described her life in a commune called the Grove of Stillness, located in rural Oregon. The Grove, she wrote, believed in purification through silence. Speaking was discouraged. Emotions were to be buried, and sins, whatever they were deemed to be, required ritual cleansing. The entries darkened over time. Judith detailed the punishment of a girl named Sarah, who had spoken to someone from outside. She was cleansed, never seen again. And then, One entry changed everything. Martin says, "We can't stay here anymore." He wants to leave, take new names, start over. But I can't forget what we did, what we buried. Judith and Martin fled the Grove in 1975. Daniel traced the Grove's history. The group had been officially disbanded after a federal investigation in 1976, though no criminal charges were ever brought. Most of its members vanished. Some changed their names, others disappeared entirely. He found an old photo in the public archives, a black and white group image from 1972. There, in the back row, stood Judith, or Emily, next to a young man labeled only as Simon. Simon looked familiar. Daniel enlarged the photo, comparing it to others he had collected. The eyes, the jawline. He was nearly certain. Simon had become Martin Everly. It was a chilling realization. The Everlys weren't just survivors of a twisted ideology. They had been its enforcers. Now, Daniel had a new theory. Martin and Judith hadn't escaped the Grove out of fear. They had fled because they were carrying secrets. Perhaps the punishment of Sarah hadn't ended in exile. Perhaps it had ended in death. And perhaps it wasn't the first. Had Claire discovered this? Had she found remnants of the Grove in the basement? The symbols scratched onto the wooden beams. The triangle within a circle, the inverted tree, had seemed odd but meaningless at first. Now they were clues. Daniel took photographs and sent them to a retired cult expert, Dr. Helena Maris, who had studied the Grove extensively. Within days, she responded. Her message was short. Those are sanctum markers, used in rituals to denote sacred ground. If they're in the basement, that place wasn't just a home. It was a chamber. Suddenly, the silence of the house took on a new shape. It wasn't just emptiness. It was reverence, a shrine to forgotten sins. Daniel returned to the basement with a forensic team. With permission from the courts, they removed a false wall at the back, where the markings were most concentrated. Behind it, they found a narrow room, no larger than a closet. Inside was a chair, chains, a blindfold, and dozens of Polaroid photos, aged and curled with time. Most were of empty rooms. Some were of the chair. A few, just a few, showed frightened faces. The last one, dated July 14th, 1994, showed Claire Jennings. The discovery reignited the investigation. For the first time, authorities treated the case not just as a domestic crime, but as a potential multi-victim cold case involving ritual abuse. But still, one question haunted Daniel. Who sent the letter? It was then that he remembered Tamara, the name signed on Claire's unsent letters. After a few calls and a background check, Daniel found her. Tamara Davis, now a social worker in Chicago. She was hesitant at first, but when Daniel explained what had been found, her voice softened. "I knew Claire was scared," she said, "but I thought she ran away. I never imagined." Daniel asked if she had sent the letter. "No," she said, "but I might know who did." She told him about a third girl, Leah, who had briefly lived with the Everlys the summer before. Claire, another foster mentorship, quiet, shy, unmemorable. She told me once that she saw something in that house, something awful. She ran away too, but unlike Claire, she made it out. Tamara gave Daniel an address in Oregon. Leah Barnes was now 38. She lived alone, worked in a bookstore, and had never told her story, not to anyone. But when Daniel arrived and showed his badge, she didn't seem surprised. She invited him in, offered tea, then sat across from him, hands folded tightly. "I've waited for someone to come," she said. She confirmed it all. The rituals, the silence, the cellar room. She had seen Martin lead Claire down there, heard Judith's voice chanting. The door had been locked. Leah had waited until dawn, then run, never looking back. But the guilt had festered. "I was too scared to speak up," she said. "But when I saw the house on the news again, I couldn't let it stay buried." She had written the letter. With Leah's statement, the case was officially closed. There would be no trial, no sentencing. Judith, barely lucid, would live out her remaining days in care. But now, Claire had justice. So did Leah, and perhaps others whose names were never known. Daniel visited number 16 one final time before it was demolished. He stood in the doorway, listening one last time to its silence. Then he walked away. Some silences, he realized, aren't empty. Some are full of the truths we're too afraid to speak. And some, at last, are finally heard. 6 months had passed since the demolition of number 16 Willow Lane. The lot now sat empty, a patch of leveled earth fenced off by weathered boards, and a faded red sign that read, "Property of North Haven County, no trespassing." But for many, the echoes of what had once stood there still lingered, especially for Officer Daniel Reeves. Daniel had returned to regular duty, his time with the Everly case logged and shelved. Officially, there was nothing more to pursue, but late at night, he'd sometimes reread the journal entries from Judith, or review the photos from the basement. One image, in particular, haunted him, not of Claire Jennings, but of a small carving on the wall behind the chair, a symbol. It wasn't just a sanctum marker, it was a tree, its roots shaped like grasping hands, its branches forming a crown. Dr. Helena Maris hadn't seen it before, which made it stand out. So Daniel dug again. He submitted the symbol to several online communities, focused on cult history and esoterica. Most offered nothing useful, but one response caught his attention. From a man calling himself Caleb Vexley, a private historian and archivist in Salem, Massachusetts. His message was short. "I've seen that symbol. It belongs to something older than the grove. Much older. I have documents. Come see for yourself." Daniel flew to Salem. Caleb Vexley lived above a rare bookshop on Darby Street. He was gaunt, pale, with long fingers and sharp eyes. He guided Daniel through narrow stairs into a room that smelled of paper, dust, and time itself. Vexley laid out several tomes. One was a translated grimoire from the 18th century, another a series of recovered field notes from a linguist who vanished in 1932. All of them contained similar sketches of the tree symbol. In one, it was labeled the rooted eye. According to the texts, the rooted eye was an ancient belief system predating most known cults. Followers believed that certain places on Earth served as listening points for something buried deep below the surface, something not quite divine, but not mortal either. They held rituals of silence, sacrifice, and solitude to open these points, and their doctrine, often involved what they called the seeding. "What is that?" Daniel asked. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "A ritual, meant to awaken whatever they believed waited below. They marked their chambers with the tree symbol. The room in your house wasn't just a prison, it was a nursery." Back in North Haven, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. Claire's death, the foster girls, the hidden room, it all pointed to something deeper. He returned to the county archives, searching not for recent crimes, but for any reports tied to Willow Lane long before the Everleys arrived. After hours of digging, he found a forgotten police report from 1947. It described the disappearance of a 10-year-old boy named Henry Mallard, last seen entering the woods behind what would later become number 16. The case had gone cold. The boy's family had moved away, and the house was unoccupied for years. In the margins, someone had scribbled, "Family heard strange noises from beneath the house, cited whispers at night." Daniel felt a chill. Claire had written about whispers too. That night, Daniel received a call. It was Dr. Maris. "Found something," she said. "A girl. She claims she was part of the Grove. She's ready to talk." Her name was Marianne Wells, now 74, living in a retirement home in Portland. When Daniel and Dr. Maris visited, she was sitting by a window, humming a tuneless melody. She greeted them with a soft smile. "You've seen the tree, haven't you?" They nodded. She told them the Grove hadn't died in Oregon. It had splintered. Some members had stayed silent. Others traveled east. A small group, Martin and Judith among them, were tasked with finding a new sanctuary. "They thought Willow Lane was special," she said. "Said the earth there responded." "What do you mean, responded?" Daniel asked. Marianne's eyes grew distant. "It sang, in dreams, in silence. They believed it was chosen." Daniel's world began to tilt. If what she said was true, then Willow Lane wasn't just the site of abuse or tragedy. It was part of something older, darker, and maybe ongoing. He dug through property records. Number 16 had originally been built in 1921 by Arthur and Lillian Mallard, Henry's grandparents, but the land had been owned by a now-defunct mining company since the 1800s. A deeper search revealed company files scanned into digital archives. One letter stood out, dated 1879, written by a foreman named Gideon Rusk. "Strange sounds from the lower shaft again. Men refused to dig, claimed to hear breathing. One claims he saw a wooden eye in the stone." Rusk's mind had been sealed. The following year, the shaft, Daniel realized, ran directly beneath Willow Lane. There had always been something there, a presence. He reached out to Dr. Maris again, and together they acquired permission to excavate what was left of the basement. With a small team, they broke through the lowest level, revealing not just a crawl space, but a descending tunnel. It was lined with roots. Some moved. They descended slowly. The air grew colder. The light from their headlamps flickered. At the bottom, they reached a chamber unlike the others. Natural stone mixed with carved walls. The rooted eye symbol was etched dozens of times, surrounding a black pit in the center. Daniel stepped closer. From inside, he heard something. Not words. A hum. It filled his ears, his head, then his body. He stumbled back, clutching his temples. Dr. Maris pulled him away. The sound stopped. They fled the tunnel, sealing it behind them. The site was immediately marked as a geological hazard. No official record would mention the pit, but Daniel knew better. The Grove had found something real, and they'd tried to control it, worship it, feed it. But now it was awake. In the months that followed, strange reports trickled in from North Haven. Dreams of trees with eyes, pets refusing to cross the vacant lot, a child mumbling symbols in her sleep. Daniel handed in his resignation, not because he gave up, but because he needed to understand. He returned to Caleb Vexley, and together they mapped similar sites across the country. Every one of them had the same signature: a house, a chamber, and silence that wasn't empty. It was listening. 6 months had passed since Daniel Reeves left the North Haven Police Department. His life had unraveled in the most unexpected way. Once a decorated officer with a sharp mind and steady hands, he was now something else entirely. A seeker, a wanderer, a man chasing whispers and symbols across forgotten parts of the country. He hadn't planned it, but after the Willow Lane pit, staying behind a desk became impossible. With Caleb Vexley's help, Daniel had traced 5 more sites marked with the rooted eye symbol. Each one bore eerie similarities: abandoned buildings, strange disappearances, reports of hallucinations, and whispers in silence. But one in particular stood out: Ashgrove, Pennsylvania. A town too small to appear on most maps, Ashgrove was nestled deep in the Appalachians, wrapped in fog and secrets. According to Caleb's research, a house had burned there in 1955 under mysterious circumstances. The only survivor, a young girl named Edith Carver, had been institutionalized for the rest of her life. In her initial statements, she mentioned a tree growing beneath the house and a voice in the walls. Daniel arrived in Ashgrove on a wet October morning. The town looked frozen in time. Empty storefronts, crooked telephone poles, and a train station with no schedule. He booked a room at the only inn, run by an elderly woman named Lorna Greer, who watched him like she'd seen too many strangers, and none of them left unchanged. "You here for the Carver place?" she asked. Daniel paused. "Yes. What do you know about it?" Lorna leaned in. "That place don't burn right, and it don't forget." The Carver house had once stood on the hill near the edge of Ashgrove. Now, it was only a stone foundation, swallowed by moss and vines. Daniel walked the perimeter with a scanner and metal probe, searching for any sign of a chamber beneath. Just as he was about to give up, the ground near the west end gave way under his boot. He dropped to his knees and began to dig. Beneath layers of mud, he found it: stone steps descending into blackness. He didn't descend immediately. Instead, he contacted Caleb. "Found another one," he said. "I'll be there tomorrow," Caleb replied. "Don't go in alone." But Daniel couldn't wait. He returned at dusk with a headlamp, rope, and recorder. The tunnel was narrower than the one in Willow Lane, but the construction felt identical. Roots protruded from the walls like ribs, and the air smelled of damp stone and decay. After 20 minutes of careful descent, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It was smaller, circular, and lined with carvings, hundreds of rooted eye symbols. In the center, stood a pedestal, and atop it lay a book bound in bark. Daniel opened it. The pages were written in a mixture of Latin, symbols, and what looked like gibberish. But certain phrases stood out. The earth dreams beneath us. The rooted eye watches in stillness. We do not feed it blood. We feed it silence. Then a sound, not a voice, not an animal, a soft, low hum, just like Willow Lane. It vibrated through his bones. Daniel turned and fled, barely climbing out of the tunnel before vomiting onto the grass. That night, he barely slept. Every time he drifted off, he dreamed of a dark forest growing inside his own chest. Caleb arrived the next day. Together, they returned to the site and retrieved the book. Caleb examined the symbols and confirmed something chilling. These aren't just cult markings, he said. They're coordinates, ritual sites, connected like points in a web. Daniel stared at the map. How many are there? Caleb traced the lines with his finger. Dozens, maybe more. But there's a pattern. They converge here. He tapped a point on the map. Briar Hollow, West Virginia. Briar Hollow was a ghost town. Literally, it had been abandoned in 1912 after a coal fire beneath the town forced an evacuation. The town still smoldered in places, and the government had fenced it off. But Daniel and Caleb knew what they were looking for. They sneaked in through a break in the fence. The town was eerie, fog clinging to broken buildings. Like cobwebs, the street signs were faded, and every surface was covered in ash. At the center of the town stood an old church, its steeple cracked in half. They entered cautiously. Inside, the pews were collapsed, the altar cracked, but behind the pulpit, they found another symbol, carved into the wall, the rooted eye. This time, it wasn't alone. Around it were names, dozens of them, written in the looping, ancient script. At the bottom of the list was a name Daniel recognized, Claire Jennings. Daniel stepped back, stunned. Impossible, he whispered. Caleb ran his hand over the list. This is a ledger, a record of sacrifices. Claire had been chosen, just like the others. Daniel's thoughts spiraled. If these names stretched back generations, if the network was this large, what were they really dealing with? Caleb's voice cut through his thoughts. This isn't just a cult. It's a religion, a forgotten one, and it never stopped. They returned to Ash Grove the next day, but something had changed. The foundation of the Carver house had collapsed into a sinkhole. Locals claimed there had been tremors in the night, but Daniel knew better. The chamber had reacted to their presence. They left town the next morning. On the drive, Caleb said something that Daniel couldn't shake. It's not just listening anymore. It's reaching. 2 weeks later, Daniel received a package. No return address. Inside was a VHS tape labeled simply, "The Next One." He borrowed an old player and pressed play. The screen flickered to static, then revealed grainy footage of a man standing in front of a farmhouse. He held the camera at arm's length, speaking directly into it. "My name is Travis Granger. I live in Merrow Creek, Kentucky. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. The trees around my house, they whisper at night. My daughter draws eyes on the walls, and there's something under the barn. I don't know what, but it's calling. The tape ended in static. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and dialed Caleb. "We're going to Kentucky. Merrow Creek, Kentucky. October 17th. Daniel Reeves had learned to stop questioning the impossible. By now, he accepted the rules of this new world. Silence meant danger. Roots carried memory. And the symbol of the rooted eye wasn't just a mark. It was a gate. The tape from Travis Granger replayed in his mind as he and Caleb drove deep into Kentucky's rolling hills. The map led them to a town so small it barely warranted a road sign. Merrow Creek was nothing more than a stretch of cracked pavement flanked by trailers, barns, and gas stations with broken pumps. They arrived at dusk. A crimson sun dripped behind the horizon as Daniel pulled up to the Granger property. The house looked tired, its windows dark. The paint faded to gray. A rusted tricycle sat overturned in the dirt yard. The barn loomed behind it, black and still. Caleb consulted the journal they'd found in Ash Grove. This is it, the last active node in the pattern. If the ledger is right, something was due to happen here within the month. Daniel scanned the house. Then we're just in time. They knocked, waited. No answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house was silent. Not quiet. Silent. No creaking wood. No distant traffic. Not even wind. A kind of oppressive stillness weighed on everything. Dust floated in rays of dying light, and the air smelled faintly of old wood and mildew. They found the living room first. On the wall, scribbled in what looked like charcoal, were dozens of crude drawings, trees, eyes, twisted roots, and in the center, a girl. His daughter, Daniel whispered. The kitchen table held half-eaten cereal. No dishes were washed. A child's backpack lay on the floor beside a pair of muddy boots. They followed the hallway to a narrow staircase, upstairs, in what was clearly the daughter's room. The symbols were worse, more chaotic. The walls pulsed with shapes that made Daniel's eyes water. She saw something, Caleb said. She saw it. From the closet came a creak. Daniel drew his flashlight and opened it. Just a few dresses and an old coat, but on the inside of the closet door, scratched deeply into the wood, were the words, "It lives in the barn now." They waited until morning. Neither slept. The night was filled with distant whispers, the creaking of trees that shouldn't have moved in still air. Once, around 3 a.m., a low groan echoed from the barn. It sounded wet. At dawn, they armed themselves with floodlights, a drone, and audio equipment. The barn was 100 feet from the house, surrounded by cracked fencing and vines. As they approached, Daniel felt a shift, like the air had thickened. Caleb's breath frosted despite the 60-degree morning. The barn door was ajar. Inside, the scent hit them first. Soil, rotting meat, mildew, and something chemical. The floor was covered in hay, though it was discolored, stained black in places. The drone flew first, scanning the loft and rafters. Nothing. Then Caleb's light hit the back wall. Carved there, massive and deep, was the rooted eye. But this one had bled. Black sap oozed from the grooves, dripping down into a circle of dirt in the center of the barn floor. That's when they saw it. A hole, just like Willow Lane, just like Ash Grove. They didn't descend immediately. Caleb examined the black sap, collecting a sample. "It's not sap," he said. "It's alive. There's microbial activity I've never seen before." Daniel approached the hole. It was steep, narrow, but it spiraled downward with crude steps carved into the earth. Something moved down there, not visibly, but energetically. The space vibrated in his spine. "We go in," he said. One last time. The descent was slow. Unlike the tunnels in previous sites, this one breathed. With each step, the walls seemed to pulse. Roots grew like veins, and the deeper they went, the more the air changed. Thicker, electric, like standing beside a massive generator. After nearly 20 minutes, they reached the chamber. This one was different. Massive, cathedral-like. A root system grew across the ceiling, like a dark chandelier. In the center stood an altar, and upon it lay a body. Travis Granger. His eyes were wide open, his mouth stretched in a silent scream. He hadn't decayed, not even bloated. He looked preserved. Beside him stood a little girl. "Alive, Clara?" Daniel asked softly. She turned. Her eyes were milky white, her skin pale, lips cracked. "He made me hear it," she whispered. "Now I can't stop." Daniel stepped closer. "We're here to help you. He wanted you to come. He said you were the last." "Who?" Clara tilted her head. "The thing with no shape. The thing with roots." Then, behind them, movement. Caleb turned, light flashing across a figure in the shadows. Not human. Tall, emaciated, its skin bark-like, its eyes lidless and wet. It moved slowly, limbs dragging, vines trailing from its mouth. Caleb raised the light. The creature shrieked, a sound like shattering glass and crying children. It charged. Daniel grabbed Clara, pulling her behind the altar. Caleb threw a flare toward the figure. It ignited, and the creature reeled back, screaming. The roots in the ceiling trembled. The chamber cracked. "We have to bring it down," Daniel shouted. Caleb pulled thermite grenades from his pack. Set charges on the supports. In minutes, they placed explosives along the base of the root system. The creature hissed from the far end, watching. Caleb handed Daniel the trigger. "For Willow Lane," he said. Daniel pressed it. Fire erupted. Roots burst into flame. The altar split. Clara screamed. Not in pain, but in release. The chamber collapsed. Daniel awoke 2 days later in a hospital bed in Louisville. Caleb had survived. Clara had been found unconscious, but alive in the nearby woods. Travis's body was never recovered. The site was sealed by FEMA, classified as a chemical spill. The barn was demolished. Daniel's left ear had gone deaf. He heard only a low hum. Weeks later, in Caleb's home lab, they examined the remains. Root samples, black fluid, soil. The results stunned them. The material wasn't from Earth, or at least not modern Earth. It predates known organic life, Caleb said. This might be primordial, something that lived before us, before language. Daniel stared at the symbol they had redrawn. "What if we never made it up?" he asked. "What if we just remembered it?" Caleb didn't respond. That night, Daniel dreamed of a massive tree underground, its roots weaving through the bones of the earth. At its base, something waited. It had no face, only eyes. The rooted eye, watching, always. The weeks following the collapse of the underground chamber in Marrow Creek felt unreal to Daniel Reeves. His world had shifted, as if he had crossed a boundary no one else knew existed. The eerie silence that had gripped him since the expedition hadn't lifted. The low hum in his left ear, a constant reminder of the things unseen, followed him everywhere. Despite the official closure of the case by FEMA, branded as a chemical contamination event, Daniel and Caleb knew the truth was far more unsettling. The rooted eye was no mere symbol. It was a mark of something ancient, a force older than humanity itself. Their days became consumed with research, trying to understand what they had uncovered. Caleb, ever the scientist, obsessed over the blackened sap, the primordial substance they had extracted from the barn. It defied every scientific principle, exhibiting signs of organic life, unlike anything on Earth. It responded to light, sound, and even thought, growing and shrinking with subtle shifts in the environment. Meanwhile, Daniel pored through old records, folklore, and cryptic journals found throughout their investigation. The pattern was clear. Throughout history, isolated rural communities had experienced strange disappearances, unnatural deaths, and eerie phenomena tied to a mysterious underground root system. Each location bore the same rooted eye symbol, carved or drawn in desperate warnings. Daniel began to realize that these sites weren't random. They were nodes of a vast subterranean network, a biological and psychic web connecting something sleeping beneath the surface. The haunting begins one night. As Daniel tried to sleep, the low hum in his ear grew louder, morphing into whispered voices. At first, they were indistinct, almost like static on an old radio. But then, words began to emerge. Return, the eye watches, the roots demand. He jolted awake, heart pounding, his room suffused with cold shadows that seemed to twitch at the edges of his vision. The next morning, Caleb found Daniel pale and exhausted. "You need to get away," he urged. "This isn't just physical anymore. It's in your mind." Daniel nodded, but felt trapped. The roots had gotten inside his head, and they weren't letting go. A new lead Caleb's analysis revealed something startling. The black sap carried genetic material unlike any known organism, but it also contained fragments of human DNA distorted and intertwined with something alien. Digging through databases, Caleb found references to a 19th century occultist named Elias Marrow, rumored to have conducted forbidden experiments in the same region. His name matched the town of Marrow Creek. Could it be a coincidence? The journal from the Ash Grove Library mentioned Marrow as well, a man obsessed with bridging the gap between humanity and some primordial force underground. Daniel and Caleb decided to visit the Marrow Estate ruins on the outskirts of town. The Marrow Estate. The mansion was long abandoned, swallowed by vines and decay. As they explored, they uncovered strange machinery and arcane symbols etched into the walls and floors. A hidden cellar door led downward into pitch darkness. Daniel's flashlight beam caught ancient manuscripts bound in cracked leather. The pages described rituals meant to awaken the great root, a living network beneath the earth, said to hold the collective consciousness of all life. One passage chilled them to the bone. The rooted eye sees all. Those who awaken it become part of the eternal web, never to escape. An encounter. As they descended deeper, Daniel felt the air pulse again. Suddenly, the low growl of the creature from the barn echoed through the stone corridors. They reached a cavernous chamber where the walls were alive with writhing roots and glowing fungi. The creature, a twisted fusion of bark, bone, and human flesh, emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. It hissed, tendrils lashing out. But this time, Daniel was ready. Using a makeshift weapon from their gear, they managed to wound the creature. It recoiled, emitting a tortured scream that shook the very earth. Before it fled, it spoke in a voice like cracking wood. The eye watches. The roots grow. You cannot escape. The final choice. Back above ground, Daniel and Caleb knew the fight was far from over. The rooted eye was awakening, and with it, the roots would spread, deeper and wider. Daniel felt the pull stronger than ever. The voices in his head were no longer whispers. They were commands. One night, the visions showed him a choice: embrace the rooted eye and join the eternal web, gaining power but losing his humanity, or destroy the nodes forever, risking death but saving others. With Caleb's help, Daniel devised a plan to return to the original Willow Lane site, to plant explosives deep in the tunnels and sever the root network once and for all. Return to Willow Lane. Their final expedition was harrowing. The tunnels had changed, grown larger, more alive, almost sentient. As they moved deeper, the roots reacted violently, attacking and attempting to ensnare them. Daniel felt the eye's gaze burning into his soul. They reached the heart of the network, a massive root system pulsating with dark energy. With moments to spare, they set the charges: destruction and sacrifice. The explosion rocked the earth, shaking the tunnels and collapsing passageways. Daniel and Caleb barely escaped as the root network was destroyed. But Daniel didn't emerge unscathed. As he lay wounded on the surface, he saw the rooted eye in the sky, a glowing mark on the clouds. The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. Epilogue: Daniel recovered, but the hum in his ear never left. Caleb continued their research in secret, preparing for the day the roots would rise again. And somewhere, deep underground, the rooted eye waited patiently, watching, always watching. Months passed since Daniel and Caleb's desperate attempt to sever the rooted eye's grasp on their world. The explosion that had shattered the ancient root network below Willow Lane had been heralded as a victory. But victory in their case was a fragile illusion. Daniel's recovery was slow. The hum in his ear persisted, sometimes shifting into distant whispers he could barely understand. At night, shadows would flicker at the edge of his vision, shapes that were never quite there. Yet, when he told Caleb, the scientist was skeptical, at least outwardly. "We've only scratched the surface," Caleb said one evening in his cramped lab, surrounded by microscopes and blinking instruments. The rooted eye. It's not a single organism. It's a system, like the internet, but biological and psychic. Destroy one node, and the rest reroute. It's adaptive, intelligent. Daniel stared at the glowing screen, showing scans of the sap residue they'd collected. So it's still out there. Caleb nodded grimly. Waiting, the whispering shadows. Daniel's nights grew worse. Sleep became impossible, invaded by restless dreams, where roots twisted through walls, pulling at him, whispering secrets of dark worlds beneath the earth. One night, he woke in a cold sweat to find his bedroom window shattered, the night wind carrying the faint scent of earth and decay. He wasn't alone. A shadow moved at the corner of the room, shifting like smoke. The low hum in his ear surged into a roar. "Daniel!" A voice breathed, hollow and ancient. He froze. The air thickened as the shape solidified. Tendrils of dark bark and glowing amber eyes. The creature from the tunnels, or something like it. Before Daniel could scream, the figure vanished, leaving behind a single black root curling over his floorboards. The town watches outside, the town of Marrow Creek, was changing. Reports of missing pets, strange illnesses, and unexplained disappearances climbed. Locals whispered about a curse. The silent house on Willow Lane, long avoided, now emitting a low moaning sound at night. Daniel and Caleb decided to investigate again, but this time they brought allies, a small team of paranormal researchers, a local historian, and a few brave townsfolk. Together, they formed a plan to monitor the house, record phenomena, and trace the source of the evil spreading through Marrow Creek. The gathering storm the first night was uneventful, but tension thickened. Their equipment picked up faint electromagnetic pulses, signs of psychic activity. At midnight, the earth trembled lightly beneath their feet, and a chorus of whispers rose from the ground. Suddenly, a violent gust slammed the front door open. The team scattered as roots burst through the floorboards, writhing like snakes. The historian screamed as a root wrapped around her ankle, pulling her down. Daniel lunged, hacking at the root with a crowbar. The house trembled, as if alive, breathing in a dark rhythm. They fled, barely escaping, as the house seemed to collapse inward, swallowing the roots back into darkness. But the battle was just beginning. The eye watches. Days later, Daniel found himself drawn to a peculiar spot in the nearby forest. A massive tree etched with the rooted eye symbol. As he touched the bark, visions flooded his mind. Ancient civilizations worshipping the root network as gods, sacrifices made to appease it, and a dark promise of rebirth through assimilation. The rooted eye was not just a threat. It was a force seeking to reclaim the Earth from humanity. With renewed resolve, Daniel and Caleb prepared for a final confrontation. The night air was thick with moisture as Daniel, Caleb, and their small band of allies prepared their equipment near the looming silhouette of the ancient tree bearing the rooted eye symbol. The forest around them pulsed with unnatural life. Leaves rustled despite the absence of wind, and shadows danced at the edge of the vision. Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his chest as he adjusted his flashlight, its beam cutting through the fog like a knife. "We don't know what we're dealing with," he said quietly. But this is the heart of it all. Mara, the local historian with a sharp mind and steady nerves, nodded. If the legends are true, this root network has been feeding off the land and people for centuries. The silent house was just one node. This tree, it's the central hub. Caleb checked his instruments, which were flickering wildly. The psychic energy here is off the charts. Whatever this is, it's alive, and it's aware of us. A crackle in the radio startled them. Static at first, then a whisper. Return. Join us. Mara's eyes widened. It's trying to communicate. Voices from the earth. As they set up a perimeter, Daniel felt the low hum intensify inside his head, merging with the voices on the radio. The whispers grew louder, forming broken phrases that chilled him. The eye watches. The roots remember. The debt must be paid. The group's unease deepened. Suddenly the ground trembled beneath their feet. Caleb's sensors screamed, lights flashing red. Roots burst from the earth, thick and black, twisting like serpents. Daniel grabbed Mara's arm. Move back! They're attacking! The roots lunged toward them with terrifying speed. Daniel fought them off with a crowbar while Mara shouted instructions over the radio. Caleb frantically worked on a device designed to disrupt the psychic network, a terrifying discovery. After narrowly escaping the onslaught, the group retreated into a nearby clearing. Mara pulled out an old, weathered book she had found in the town's archive, stained with age. This belonged to Elias Marrow, she explained. He was trying to harness the root's power, but he warned of a price. Once the network awakens, it demands souls to sustain itself. Daniel flipped through the pages, eyes scanning diagrams of ritual symbols and descriptions of a great eye watching beneath the earth. Caleb frowned. If we don't stop it, it'll spread beyond this forest, beyond Marrow Creek. The plan. The team devised a desperate strategy to sever the root's central node using a combination of explosives and the psychic disruptor Caleb had been refining. They knew it was risky. The roots could retaliate fiercely. As they prepared for their final assault, tension mounted. Daniel stared at the tree, the rooted eye symbol carved deep into its bark, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Tonight, it ends, he vowed. Into the heart, with gear strapped tight, the group ventured back into the forest, moving cautiously toward the tree. The air grew colder, heavier. The shadows seemed to reach for them. Daniel's ears rang with the whispers, his vision flickering as if reality itself was unraveling. At the base of the tree, thick roots pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Caleb placed the disruptor near the trunk, while Mara and the others set explosives around the perimeter. Suddenly, the ground split open, and from the depths emerged the creature, larger, more terrifying than before. Its bark-like skin cracked, revealing glowing amber veins. Its eyes burned with ancient rage. The final battle, the creature lunged at them, tendrils whipping through the air. Daniel dodged, striking with a crowbar. Caleb activated the disruptor, emitting a high-frequency pulse that made the creature roar in pain. Mara lit the fuse on the explosives. "Run!" she shouted. The forest exploded in a blinding flash as the charges detonated. The ground trembled violently. The creature howled. Engulfed in fire, and debris. Aftermath. When the dust settled, the tree lay shattered. The eerie glow of the rooted eye vanished. The psychic hum faded into silence. But Daniel knew this was only a temporary victory. He looked up at the dark sky, whispering, "The roots may be broken here, but the eye watches everywhere."